Hello everyone, this is Group 3. Our group members are Margot and Scarlett. Today we are going to talk about realism in philosophy. Here is the content. We need to study the definition of realism, the origin of the term of realism, history of realism, principles, varieties, forms, and realism in education. The first is definition. There are different definitions in different books. In dictionary, here the definition of realism. The doctrine that universals have a real objective existence represents the theory that particular things exist independently of our perception. In philosophy book, realism is the view that a reality of material objects and possibly of abstract concepts exists in an external world independently of our minds and perceptions. This is the origin of the term realism. The term realism comes from Latin realis, who is to be really, really real, and it was first used in the abstract metaphysical sense by Immanuel Kant in 1781. Now let's learn some history knowledge of realism. This is the founder of realism, Aristotle. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher and a polemist during the classic period in ancient Greece. His philosophy has exerted a unique influence on almost every form of knowledge in the West, and it continues to be a subject of contemporary philosophical discussion. Aristotle believed that to understand an object, its ultimate form had to be understood, which does not change. According to Aristotle's thinking, for example, a rose can exist in the mind without being physically present, but ultimately the rose shares properties with all other roses and flowers, here its forms, although one rose may be red and another peach-colored. Realism is a reaction against a curriculum consisting of studies that have become bookish or abstract, focus on things rather than words or ideas. According to realism, the external world of objects is not imaginary. The realistic movement in education started from the 16th century. Here are 5 principles of realism. The first one, phenomenal world is true. Second, senses are the doors of knowledge. Third, opposition of idealism. Fourth, man is a part of a material world. The fifth, emphasizes on experiment and observation. Now let's study some varieties of realism. Metaphysical realism. Metaphysical realism is a view that most of the objects that populate the world exist independently of our thought and have their natures independently of how, if at all, we conceive of them. Naive realism, also known as direct realism, is a philosophy of mind rooted in a common sense theory of perception that claims that the senses provide us with direct awareness of the external world. The naive realist view is that objects have properties such as texture, smell, taste, and color. They are usually perceived absolutely correctly. We perceive them as they really are. Scientific realism. The world that science describes is the real world, independent of what we think of it. With the philosophy of science, it is often framed as an answer to the question, how is the success of science to be explained? Moral realism. Moral realism, also ethical realism, or moral platonism, is the position that ethical sentences express propositions that refer to objective features of the world, some of which may be true to the extent that they report those features accurately. Here are three moral facts: non-natural realism, type natural realism, and trivial token natural realism. Non-natural realism. Moral facts are abstract, non-physical states of affairs, like mathematical facts. Type natural realism. Moral facts are equivalent to or supervenient upon natural facts. Trivial token natural realism. Moral terms are correctly applied to natural facts, but morality is not necessarily constituted by natural facts. Aesthetic realism. Aesthetic realism is a philosophy which describes the nature of reality itself and the relation among reality, the human self, and the art. Aesthetic realism is a view that are mind-independent aesthetic facts. Here is a picture from Van Gogh. Different people have different view on this picture. This is aesthetic realism. Aesthetic realism was founded in 1941 by the American poet, critic, and educator Eli Siegel. Here three principles of aesthetic realism. The deepest desire of everyone is to like the world. The greatest danger for a person is to have contempt for the world and the things in it. The way to like the world and what is in it is to see both at the aesthetic oneness of opposites. Here we need to pay attention to. Every person has an attitude to the world as a whole which affects every aspect of his or her life. Now, let's introduce some forms of realism in education. The first one is scholastic realism. It started when medieval thinkers wanted to bring together a relation between faith and reason, relied on authorities from the past, synthesis of knowledge, deductive approach to reasoning, use of syllogistic logic. Education is the process by which he lifts himself up to the eternal. Humanistic realism. It sprang up after the Renaissance. It studies the present solution to each problem of life, aimed to secure a knowledge of human society and institution of nature, and man's reaction to nature chiefly through the content and not the form of classics. John Manton was the representative of humanistic realism. Social realism. Education should not produce men who are unfit in social life. The purpose of education, according to social realists, is prepare the practical man of the world. Lord Manton was the representative of social realism. Sense realism. The sense realism in education emphasizes the training of the sense. Senses are the gateway of knowledge, and learning takes place the operation of the senses. Francis Bacon was the representative of sense realism. New realism. It appears the methods and results of modern development in physics that do not consider the scientific principles everlasting while they express the changeability in them. They support the education of art with the science and analytical system of education with the humanistic feelings. Bertrand Russell was the representative of New Realism. are the meanings and instructions based on realism. For curricular should be practical and useful, should concentrate on the basics and avoid fads and fads. Curricular should be highly organized, curriculated, and aligned throughout the scope and sequence offered by schools. Curricular should be based upon pre-established standards and criteria. Curricular should be experiential whenever possible. For faculty, teachers systematically organize and present content within a discipline, demonstrating the criteria used in making decisions. Teaching methods focus on facts and basic skills through demonstration and recitation. For students must also demonstrate the ability to use observation and experimentation for critical and scientific thinking. Character is developed by the training of rules of conduct. That's all. Thanks for your listening.